that last week it seemed odd. I mean, for instance, we made a lot of chatter about NVIDIA. Now, NVIDIA reports next week, and somehow NVIDIA is, as David would ask me, it's the key to the market. Now, it shouldn't be. I mean, there is an absolutely terrific piece we've got about Google, where Google is up 7,661% since it came public on today, August 9th, August 19th. And what I say to myself is, okay, do I really like NVIDIA? Do I just judge it by next Wednesday? Or do we look at the body of work of NVIDIA? Somewhat like Olivier. We look at the body of work. We don't just look at his final, is it safe? Not that he was bad there. I think that we have to remember that the great wealth is created by not reacting to a given month.
Right. Although, as you point out, 18% gain last week, right? A note on Friday out of Goldman saying, do we get that normal post-Labor Day gross up? Right, if it did some of that work in August.
Yeah, but look, one of the things that I was dealing with someone who is integral to the trying to fill in for David M&A process, and he said, "Look, it's August and it's busy as I can recall." I also, I had a nice talk with Lisa Su. We're going to talk about that acquisition, but I just want to point out that we talked this weekend about what time I get up. The absurdity by what thinks I get up at 4:30. You kidding me? I get up at 4:15. I got to get the jump on all the bad guys. But one thing that was very clear was NVIDIA was down $1.70. Now, since this, what's come out at 6 a.m. was Lisa Su's somewhat competitive acquisition of a company, ZT. We'll get into it, but the stock, NVIDIA then goes up. So NVIDIA is a true oddity. It had a huge week last week. And I'm kind of hoping, as someone who's owned it forever for my travel trust, I don't want to come in hot. You want to come in cold. But this thing is its own animal. And there are people who are doing this work which just say it's very cheap. We'll look back and think it's very cheap.
AMD is projecting that the data center AI market will grow at a 70% compounded annual growth rate in the coming years. It's the chipmaker's second acquisition in 2024. It acquired Silo, an AI lab, for less than $1 billion in July. Both transactions are seen as a way to better compete with NVIDIA and own more of the hardware inside the data centers. Wolf analysts are positive on the deal, with a $210 price target implying about a 40% upside from where AMD is trading right now. Though AMD's got a ways to go, with $4.5 billion in chip sales expected this year. That compares to NVIDIA, which is expected to bring in about $100 billion in data center sales in 2024. Carl?
Seema, I'm just curious if there's an expectation among the analyst and investor community that there will be a lot more consolidation of this type, whether it's from AMD, whether it's from NVIDIA itself, or others that compete in this space.
That's a great point. What's interesting, if you look at the M&A, and you probably already know this, but there's been a lot of M&A within the AI space, but less so amongst those in the semiconductor sector. I think this deal, of course, we'll be watching very closely to see if others do the same. This whole idea of owning more of the supply chain, not just designing the chips, but the AI servers that these chips go into that are then sold to the hyperscalers. So Lisa Su made the point on the call today, Leslie, that by owning more of the supply chain, she hopes to speed up the workload. So the incentive certainly is there.
If earnings growth is slowing, it's still great, obviously, and it's a standout relative to everywhere else. But if it's in itself slowing, does the price appreciation justify the valuation based on earnings growth that is undoubtedly slowing? And when spending is not. Right. Spending continues to exponentially grow.
So I think we get some strong insight to your question at the end of the month. I mean, NVIDIA is going to step forward, and I think they're going to answer your question for all of us. And if there is a misstep there, is there more of a slowdown than anticipated? I think the market responds accordingly. But until that moment, you have to look at all of these earnings as innocent until proven guilty.
All right. Well, it's NVIDIA on the 28th, right? So it's still a little ways, but we'll be right up against it. Goldman today reiterates the buy on that stock. Conviction list is how they reiterate it as well. They think the setup is still constructive. Kevin, what do you think?
Because NVIDIA doesn't pay a dividend, I've been on the outside looking in for seemingly 2 years, watching it go up 40%, not just in 2 days, but 157% in a year.
Hey, wait till they announce that.
Yeah, thanks. I feel like there's valuations there. So if we look back at the 2000 bubble and you think, okay, well, there were no earnings, it didn't support it, NVIDIA continues to impress. These earnings are there. The multiple keeps coming down. So I think that that's a trade that people are going to continue to make. And just to put a little bit of a additional thought there, the passive flows of money go to these names because of their representation into the index. So you're constantly having money coming in. Joe made a great point with the share buybacks that took place, and why wouldn't they a week and a half ago? But these stocks being inflated to the levels that they were 2 weeks ago doesn't make them completely out of whack at this point.
Bryn, so we reiterate the buy, we reiterate the conviction list at Goldman, and they say everything sets up for a constructive quarter. How do we see it?
Yeah, and I think on top of that, which I think we'll get into with AMD's purchase of, ZT system, Lisa Su is just confirming what Jensen will say in a couple of weeks. And so I think the hyperscalers, all of their earnings are already out. And so they've all told us they're going to continue to spend at this enormous rate. And so that money, the majority, is going to go to NVIDIA. So why wouldn't NVIDIA come in with strong numbers and guide higher? Because we haven't heard one firm, Tesla, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, et cetera, saying they are slowing down. They are all in. And so I think when you have that wave of money, it's just this trend is still intact. And so and I think also on the Qs, if you think about, to Kevin talking about the similarity to the late 90s, is the Qs, look at the 3-year number over the last 3 years. The Qs have had a cumulative return of 33%. That's it. From 97 to 99, you're talking about 100+%. So it's a very, very, very different environment, I think, for these companies versus the late 90s, when you only have the Qs are up 33%, which averages 10. That's in line with a normal time. So I think that NVIDIA is going to kick this off again. And, companies like NVIDIA, Palantir, et cetera, will continue to be where money wants to flow.
I don't understand why automatically when people read the headlines about the AMD deal, they extrapolate this is a negative for NVIDIA. This is competition. This is AMD moving in on market share. I think it's a scenario where both AMD, NVIDIA, Avago, KLA Corp, Lam Research, everything that's AI adjacent is ultimately going to be able to profit from the spending on the logistics, the growth, the build out of the innovation itself. And Bryn mentioned Palantir. Yes, I own AMD. Palantir is probably the name that I am most excited about, and it's certainly rewarding investors in terms of its price action. But AMD's had a very strong recovery. Taiwan Semi. Look, it's not just NVIDIA that made the comeback. You mentioned Adam Parker before. Let's remember 2 weeks ago, Adam Parker sat with you on set and said the one area of the market that he believed there was opportunity was in the semiconductors, and all of the semiconductors universally have responded accordingly. Even going beyond those, you can look at some of the software AI adjacent names like Cadence Design and Synopsys. Those are responding well. So AI adjacent, AI Halo, it's all still real. It's present. It's working.
Who said this deal was bad for NVIDIA? I haven't heard any of that. NVIDIA's up 2%. This is all about AMD and whether they can better compete with NVIDIA. I haven't heard the commentary that this deal somehow for ZT is bad for NVIDIA, and the market certainly doesn't think it is. This seems to be more about AMD and whatever they have to do to better compete with the likes of NVIDIA.
There's a couple notes out there on social media and competing networks suggesting that this could be bad for NVIDIA. I'll just completely dismiss that. I don't think so at all. I think this is good for AMD, and NVIDIA is going to be fine.
Okay, so if that's the case, if you look at your coverage universe with regard to semiconductors and circuit makers and systems and everybody else, is NVIDIA still the top of the heap, and does it maintain its position as the best pick in your mind? Or do we think as though there are NVIDIA-like returns elsewhere in semiconductors?
I do believe they are the top dog, and they really threw down the gauntlet with their GB200 offering, their racks of 72 and 36 GPUs in a holistic system. And now everyone is trying to catch them and that design. And I would expect this holistic system approach to only continue and or accelerate in the future on NVIDIA's offerings. So they are the top dog, and everyone is trying to catch.
All right, and that brings up the question. NVIDIA earnings are coming up next week, and what exactly are we going to expect from them? I would say that a lot of the volatility that we've seen in the stock has been reporting, nothing confirmed, but reporting about the future and capacity for Blackwell, everything else with regard to their next generation chips.
Yeah, I think we've seen pretty much at this point a $1.5–2 billion beat and raise every single quarter. And I think we should dial that in for this quarter. Anything else would be a surprise. As we're looking forward, we really need to understand more about the complexities of these delays that we continue to hear about for GB200, for these new systems overall. What's really going wrong with them? How quick can they respin a chip or a system? And what is this delay going to look like and the impact on revenue? How much of a push out? And so that will probably be the number one topic in this upcoming earnings announcement.
Do you think this deal helps inform or influence what CEO Jensen Huang says on the call next week when NVIDIA reports earnings on the 28th, or not really?
I don't think this matters to NVIDIA in the short term, because when we look out at the next 3 to 4 quarters at least, the market is still very supply constrained. Right? There is a lot of supply constraints when it comes to back-end packaging. There's a lot of supply constraints when it comes to the availability of advanced high bandwidth memory. So I think for the next several quarters, demand is very strong. So customers are willing to buy whatever products they can get their hands on. And today, a lot of that product is Hopper, right? We think that Blackwell perhaps has been shifted out by a quarter or so, but just the demand for NVIDIA's Hopper product is so strong. So in the near term, we think numbers can stay strong. But when it comes to this AMD ZT deal, I don't think it matters to NVIDIA for the next several quarters.
Well, yeah, NVIDIA stock also up better than 3%, even as AMD is up about 3% on this deal. Vivek, Arya, thank you.
Chris, you don't necessarily talk individual names, but the one name seems to matter maybe more than anything else right now, and it is NVIDIA. I did reference the fact they will report their earnings on August 28th. Your bullish view is pretty clear from what you've articulated today. What's really riding in your mind on that report?
Well, I think it's the biggest thing that's riding on the report is the momentum. We had a huge momentum coming off of, obviously August 5th. But if you look at what has performed and what hasn't off of that momentum, the semiconductor names have actually underperformed, albeit except for 1 or 2, overall relative to the rest of the momentum area. Systematic institutional investors, position traders on a day-to-day basis are going to have to follow the momentum. They did it to the downside on the great carry unwind. They did it back on this reversal these last couple of weeks. And good results coming out of bellwethers like that, momentum bellwethers, are needed to keep that area at bay. They're not necessarily needed to significantly outperform the so-called whisper expectations for the whole rest of the market to change what is beginning to happen, which is a greater participation.
Lauren, you want to address that too? Just all that might be riding now on this earnings report, given the volatility that's been introduced in the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no question that NVIDIA's earnings are likely to drive the market as a whole. And whether that happens, of course, is a function not only of what the earnings are, but what guidance is. And there is potentially slightly less risk on the back of an earnings environment that has otherwise been fairly constructive, that you see a big market miss in the moment of an NVIDIA earnings miss. But where the stakes get larger for me, from an allocator and from an economist perspective, is that from my perspective, actually the biggest risk to the economy is now a major sell-off in the market. Now, it'd have to be sustained, but our research suggests that for every 5% drawdown on the equity market that is sustained, you get about a 0.5 percentage point of consumer spending off of annualized GDP. That's a major number. May even be bigger in this economic cycle, where we know that the preponderance of consumer spending is now coming from high-income consumers who are so impacted by the ebbs and flows of the market. So it really can't be overstated how important that report is next week, something we'll be watching closely, not just for tech earnings, but for economic trajectory as well.
We're back. AMD rallying today on news it plans to acquire server builder ZT Systems, the latest move by the chip maker to step up competition against the likes of NVIDIA in the AI arms race. NVIDIA investors, though, not shaken by that news, because right there on your screen, the stock's up near 4%. Joining me now is Doug Clinton of Deepwater Asset Management. The firm recently bought that stock, that being NVIDIA. Welcome. So you finally decided to buy NVIDIA. The big sell-off a couple weeks ago was too much to pass up?
It was too good to be true for us. I mean, NVIDIA is a stock that they are the arms supplier of this AI arms race. And we've wanted to own it for a while, but for price. And we finally got that opportunity. The yen carry trade blew up. There were rumors about Blackwell delays, their new chip. And when the stock traded down into the mid-90s, you had a kind of forward PE, 25. We felt like that was the right time to enter.
This news today of AMD and this deal, if you're an NVIDIA investor now that you're a new one, is it a snoozer to you? Or is it meaningful in your mind?
I don't think it changes anything for the next 1 to 2 years. Let's put it that way. I mean, really what this is about is AMD trying to get more competitive in these training clusters, helping big customers, the hyperscalers, build out data centers and be more creative. It's something they weren't doing before. It's something NVIDIA is already very good at. So it's not, something that AMD is now doing, NVIDIA is not. I don't think it's a big threat.
Okay, so August 28th, that's the date that's looming large, right? It's NVIDIA's earnings report. You want to just tell me as a new investor how you're thinking about that day?
Well, I felt like it was probably de-risked when we bought it at 95, but now I'm a little more concerned. We've run 30% in 2 weeks.
The run back is crazy.
It's difficult, and I think that resets expectations going into that event. The thing that worries me, and I don't know that it's going to be an issue or not, but what worries me now that didn't worry me before, is we do have these rumors of the Blackwell delay. And so if that turns out to be true, if it looks like there's maybe this air pocket in revenue a little bit as NVIDIA waits a quarter or so to actually get those products into market, that could be something for the stock that's dangerous. I think most people who are paying attention to the story know that this delay is possible, but there's always someone who doesn't know.
Are you thinking about, just how much NVIDIA might be over-earning now because of all of the spending that we're seeing from the hyperscalers in this area and the mega cap stocks in and of themselves, how much they're spending and what that means in the big picture?
Yeah.
We don't really know.
We don't, and I also would argue, I don't know that the hyperscalers are overspending. I would take issue with that. I think that they are appropriately spending, and maybe some of them should even be more aggressive, because when we think about AI, it is the most important technology maybe that we ever develop. And so I think it's critical for all of these hyperscalers to have a game in this race and really put their best foot forward, invest as much as possible, because if they miss it, that's worse than if they spend a couple $100 billion on CapEx and AI turns out to be real.
But you still have to get a return on the investment. And by the way, I don't mean to suggest that they're overspending. I mean, their spending rates are up 40 or 50% year on year, but the idea that they're spending so much that if there is any part of a bearish view or at least a cautious one on NVIDIA is the fact that as a result of that spending, they're over-earning now.
Right. Well, I think for us, this AI bull market that we're in, I think it's still very live, very vibrant. I still think we have 2 to 4 years in terms of this AI bull market. And so maybe as we get toward the end of that, we can have a deeper conversation in terms of sort of over-earning. But I think that this is the reality of NVIDIA in terms of earnings for the next few years.
All right, I hope you're all enjoying this nice green day in the market, and especially in NVIDIA. The S&P closed up nearly 1% on the day, while NVIDIA had a nice move higher, finishing the day up about 4.3% at $130 per share. I'm excited to talk about NVIDIA, but first I need to talk about the rest of the market really quick. As I've been saying for a while now, NVIDIA's price action between now and earnings will be largely dependent on the rest of the market. If the market moves lower, it will weigh down on NVIDIA, but if the market can simply remain calm and not have any more major drawdowns like we saw earlier this month, then I think NVIDIA still has some room to move higher. As I mentioned in Friday and Saturday's videos, I think we are dealing with a temporary positive sentiment shift in the market right now. Last Friday, we got housing data that was not good. U.S. housing starts came in nearly 100,000 less than expected. Housing starts month over month were expected to be negative 1.5%, and instead they were negative 6.8%. And building permits came in worse than expected as well. And you would think that this data would cause the market to trade lower if market participants are worried about a potential recession. But that's not what the market did. The market opened last Friday and just shook off the housing data as if it wasn't that big of a deal. Why did they do this? As I mentioned last week, market participants are temporarily shelving their fears of recession and are instead focusing ahead on Jackson Hole this Friday, NVIDIA earnings on August 28th, and FOMC in September in anticipation of Fed rate cuts. In other words, this is a temporary positive sentiment shift, and I'm even more confident in saying this after what we saw this morning. This morning, we got a new leading economic index report. LEI came in worse than expected at negative 0.6% month over month, when consensus estimates were negative 0.4%. But that didn't stop market participants from bidding the market higher. So again, I think we are dealing with a temporary positive sentiment shift in which market participants have temporarily put their fears of recession on the back burner and are instead focusing ahead to Jackson Hole this Friday, NVIDIA earnings on the 28th, and then FOMC in September. Looking ahead this week, we get Fed minutes on Wednesday, initial jobless claims, and flash PMI on Thursday, and then most importantly, Powell's speech at Jackson Hole on Friday. The market will be watching Powell like a hawk this Friday, listening in for any indication of a Fed rate cut in September. So we may have some volatility in the market this Friday as Powell is speaking. In the short term, NVIDIA's price action will be largely dependent on the rest of the market, and specifically the market's reaction to each of these economic reports and macro events. Looking at NVIDIA's chart, I like what I see overall. This past Saturday, I told you that we were approaching this resistance trend line, and I wasn't sure if we would get rejected here or break through it. I mentioned that normally I would want to wait for the fourth touch of a trend line like this before seeing a breakout, but I told you that this is a unique situation because excitement surrounding NVIDIA earnings is growing rapidly right now. And so I told you this past Saturday that I thought it was possible that we could just break above this trend line sooner rather than later. And today that is what happened. We have a very clear breakout to the upside on the daily time frame, and that is very encouraging to see. Now in the short term, I'm curious to see if we will come back down to retest this trend line as support before moving higher or not. I don't know what the future holds, but after having a nice move higher today, I would not be surprised if we have a relatively flat day tomorrow, and that is as long as nothing unexpected happens. We do have multiple Fed officials scheduled to speak tomorrow, so we could potentially see some volatility while they're speaking. Ultimately, though, I think the next big moment is Jackson Hole this Friday when Fed Chair Powell speaks. If Powell very clearly communicates that rate cuts are coming in September and possibly hints at more rate cuts later this year, then I think the market trades higher, and that bodes very well for NVIDIA in the short term. If Powell does not communicate that rate cuts are coming in September, then I think the market would start to feel a little nervous and NVIDIA could trade lower in the short term if that is the case. Right now, all eyes are on Jackson Hole this Friday, and then of course earnings next Wednesday on the 28th. NVIDIA is expected to report a solid quarter next Wednesday, and they are expected to increase guidance as more hyperscalers like Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, and Google increase CapEx spending on AI by billions of dollars. If Blackwell is delayed, then that does not really concern me regarding the long-term future of NVIDIA. If there is a delay in Blackwell, then NVIDIA can simply sell more H100 GPUs in the interim because demand is so great right now, and they would likely just guide higher for future quarters in which they expect Blackwell to ship in volume. At least that's how I see it. So put simply, I don't know what the future holds, especially in the short term, because anything could happen. From a long-term perspective, though, I am bullish on the future of NVIDIA. With all of that being said, I hope your week is off to a great start, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about NVIDIA in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video so more people will see it. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.